Chapter 3. A plot. The greatest rules of dramatic writing are conflict, conflict, and conflict. James Frey. I've discovered there are two kinds of writers: those who plot everything out ahead of time, and those who write into a mist that gradually clears as the story unfolds, or a mix of both. Okay, 3 kinds of writers. Whatever you're most comfortable with is the way you should write. Neither method is right or wrong. What matters is that you find the way your mind and muse works and trust that natural process. I've read a lot of writing books that tell you they know the only way to write a book. Well, that way is really their way. You need to find your internal rhythm, your own process, and work with that. It doesn't mean you can't learn from others. I read widely, cull the gold from the dross, and I toss the rest to the side. I don't let anyone's ideas mess with me or my muse. Whatever your method, before you've finished your suspense novel, there are things that have to be there for the book to work in the genre. These are tools that help me make sure my book has a strong foundation. If you plot ahead, you can use them to plan, or after you emerge from the mist, use these techniques in your editing phase to make your book as strong as possible. Growing your idea or doing a post-mortem on your idea using plot points. Screenwriter Sid Field has a great method for discovering the main plot points of your story. I've heard them called set pieces too. What it means is, if you're writing a particular type of story, there are elements that you must have. For instance, in addition to the elements common to a novel, a mystery would also have a murder, clues, a sleuth, an investigation, red herrings, and a reveal. These would be mystery set pieces. A romance novel's set pieces would include a meeting, a first kiss, problems that keep them apart, and problems that bring them together, and an HEA, happy ever after. Suspense set pieces are similar to a mystery, but would also include a problem to solve, a ticking clock, setbacks to overcome, investigations, reveals, and endings. If you're mixing other genres into your suspense, such as romance, keep in mind that you'll need to weave these set pieces, or genre conventions, with your suspense set pieces. Depending on your target market, either the suspense will be your dominant plot, with the romance as a subplot, or the reverse. But, and this is important, if you can remove either the subplot or the main plot and still have a story, you haven't done your job. Both genre elements need to be integral to the story in the same way a skeleton is integral to the human body. What I like about Sid Field's plot points is that they give you sort of a roadmap within a roadmap. He uses his points for screenwriting, but I find it very helpful when working on my novels. I use a lot of screenwriting techniques in my writing. Because screenwriting focuses on the visual, they help me see my story in ways that novel writing books don't. Field identifies key elements or set pieces as the setup or beginning, inciting incident, plot point 1, plot point 2, climax, resolution. The setup or beginning is the way your character's world is before the problem arises. It may be included in your actual novel, or it may not. It depends on the needs of your book. Some writers like to begin in the midst of the problem, or after the inciting incident because it makes a better beginning, but you need to know what the character's life was before. If you're not sure, experiment with it. Read a bunch of beginnings and try adapting those techniques to your novel. Keep pushing until you find the right beginning for your story. I spend a lot of time working and reworking my beginnings. We'll talk about the setup more when we talk about mood, scene, and tone, but right now we'll just say the story needs to begin. The next plot point or set piece you need is the inciting incident. While it sounds important, it just means something goes wrong in your character's world. It's the moment when your character sees something they shouldn't, or receives information that is dangerous, or turns down the wrong street. Someone dies, someone goes missing. A crime is committed. Something happens, something bad. In Spy, the inciting incident is when Kel dives through the sunroof of Isabel's car. This gives her the opportunity to change her life. Notice the inciting incident is just the beginning of change. The character still needs to make a decision. When I was writing The Key, it took me a long time to figure out what my inciting incident would be. It could have been before the story when Sarah decides to join the Air Force, but I think it's when Sarah lands on a mysterious outpost and she decides to go into the dark and scary building. This action changes Sarah's personal story, and eventually that decision impacts the larger story in ways even I didn't see coming. The setup and inciting incident should happen in the first 100 pages of a 400-page novel, and they should be quickly followed by the first key plot point where your main character decides to act, that moment where he or she chooses to become involved. They may have inadvertently gotten into the mess, but at some point they need to become proactive. When the bad guys push, they need to start pushing back. Don't feel bad if it takes you a while to isolate the key moment. Sometimes I can't see it until I go back and look, but if you don't find it, you need to rework the story until there is a key moment of character decision. It's important that your character acts and isn't just acted upon. The middle of your story is the longest section and has this unfortunate tendency to sag. If your story is 400 pages, then by the 200-page point, you should be midway through your story. You may not know where that is when you first start. Sometimes knowing your midpoint only helps you in the rewrite, but at some point, you want to be able to see a story that is evenly balanced on either side of your midpoint in the page count. If all the action is occurring in the first part and things slow down in the second half, you have a problem, and you need to start shifting things around and/or brainstorming more conflict and action. If you're not sure your story's balanced, get some note cards and go through it scene by scene. Lay all the cards out and count them. You can also color code them by scenes that reveal character, action scenes, character reflection scenes, etc. This exercise is also useful in creating a marketing synopsis, which is helpful if you're looking for an agent or editors, but also when setting up your selling pages on your website or for the various vendors. By the end of your middle third of the story, there should be another key plot point that, again, spins the story in a new direction. This could be finding out the person you thought was the bad guy isn't the main bad guy, but a minor bad guy. If you've ever watched the show 24, they do this very, very well. That show could be a primer on how to make characters suffer and how to ratchet up the suspense. This plot point also needs to steer or propel the story toward the climax, which should occur close to the end of the story. Just reading this might make you feel overwhelmed. It can sound very clinical when you're talking about plot points and spins and climaxes. Keep in mind that your book isn't fixed until you want it to be. You can change anything. You can make it all better during the rewrite phase. Part of being successful at writing suspense is developing a feel for the ebb and flow of action. Looking for key action scenes is a check and balance for your gut instinct. You need to be able to write them, and then you need to be able to find them, but you don't have to do any of it all at once. I don't know too many authors who don't have their own black moment while writing a book. It's a point when you're sure you've written crap and that the story isn't going to work, let alone end. I go through this with every book. All I can tell you is, trust yourself. Trust your characters. Keep pushing forward. You can always fix what you've written, but you can't fix what you haven't written. You can't edit an empty page. Get something down, even if it seems over the top and outrageous. Don't be afraid to push your personal envelope. The first draft is just for you. Again, a lot of this will help you in that rewrite, help you be able to bring a critical eye to your work and see what's there and what's missing so you can make it the best book possible. Which brings us inevitably to the climax and resolution. In a suspense story, the climax and resolution are fairly easy to define. The climax should involve a black moment when all seems lost, a dazzling wrap-up where the bad guy is thoroughly defeated, where the hero-heroine triumphs and the problem he-she caused ends in a satisfying way. Your suspense climax should deliver on what you've promised all through your book. If you've promised a high-profile, larger-than-life ending, don't wimp out. Keep pushing until you deliver the goods. I read this book with this unstoppable villain. All through the book, he dogs the hero and heroine, is on their heels, almost getting them again and again. Then, the stunning climax has the villain run out of steam just as he is about to defeat the hero. It was stunning, all right. Stunningly disappointing. Don't panic. In the next chapter, I discuss some ways to crank up the suspense and deliver on the smash-bang ending. The resolution is the wrap-up of the disruption in your characters' lives and should be close on the heels of the climax. The resolution resolves your character's life, not the story problem. They return to normal or to their new normal, or they've lost normal forever. If you're writing a romantic suspense, then the romance also needs to be resolved by the end of the book. And don't forget your subplot. It should have some of the set pieces of the main story, including a smaller climax and resolution. The best subplots are tied to the main storyline so that they all wrap up together. The best subplot mirrors the main plot or contrasts with it. For instance, in Bite Me, the subplot with of elusive hacker and the main character's partner mirrors, and sometimes contrasts, the main plot both in action and emotion. There is a romance. Again, this is something you can fix in rewrites. What plot you make dominant and which you make sub depends on your personal preference and the market you are targeting. For instance, some romance publishers' readers like a 50-50 split. Others prefer the romance or suspense to be dominant. In my books, the subplot is a romance between the main characters, though in the later books in my Lonesome Lawman series, I also had a subplot with some of my supporting characters. Your subplots needs to be tightly woven into your story. Once again, if you can remove it without harm to your story, you don't have a subplot. You have a story within a story, and you should connect it to the main plot or get rid of it. If you're having trouble with your subplot, try getting rid of it, or set it aside until you've got the main story doing what you want. I can't repeat this often enough. Your story isn't fixed until it's in print. You write and rewrite until it's how you want it. If you don't like deleting, create a file just to save deleted material. And keep in mind that nothing you write is ever really lost. It comes, it goes, it finds its place, just not always in your time frame. Learning when to let go, when to delete, is as important as learning what to keep in. If you're totally in love with a scene or even just a sentence or sentences, some writers say to get rid of it. Love clouds the thinking. This is true, but I've learned they aren't always right. Some of my favorite scenes have gone on to become readers' favorite scenes too. The trick is to get enough distance to see if it adds to the story, moves the plot forward, or reveals something new about your characters. If it is just sitting there all cute and sassy, then yes, you need to get rid of it. To sum up, setup, inciting incident, plot point 1, plot point 2, climax, resolution. If you can find all these in your story and they are nicely balanced on either side of your midpoint, you're well on your way to having a strong suspense novel. Chapter 4. Creating great characters. Each writer is born with a repertory company in his head, and as you get older, you become more skillful in casting them. Gore Vidal. Developing strong characters for your suspense novel is vitally important. I won't spend reading time with characters I don't like or who don't act in ways that make sense. Readers want to believe in your characters. When you see someone going into the slightly open door of their apartment, are you thinking, how brave or how stupid? I'm thinking, how stupid unless they have been trained to go through that door. I want characters who are smart. That doesn't mean they need to know everything, but they do need to have common sense. There are a variety of methods for creating characters and about 1 million books out there on the subject. Some writers have to know everything they can about their characters before they can start writing about them. Others create their characters on the fly, working on them as they come up in the story. My approach is a mix of both of these techniques, culled from 2 books that are essential to my process. GMC, Goal, Motivation, and Conflict, 1996, by Deborah Dixon, Griffin Books. Playwriting. The Structure of Action, Revised and Expanded Edition, paperback, by Sam Smiley, Norman Burt, contributor. This will be a huge shock, but Dixon's book is about goal, motivation, and conflict. Okay, not rocket science, but a great resource if you're having trouble creating problems that affect both your characters' public and private lives. The Dixon book helps you identify your main character's goals, internal and external motivation, and the conflicts between the characters. For instance, in Bite Me, Phoebe is a thief. Jake is a U.S. Marshal who has been assigned to track down her and her partner in crime. As he gets closer to Phoebe, he is attracted to her and learns he is protecting a murderer. This puts his desire to do the right thing and protect the innocent in conflict with reality because the murderer appears to be law-abiding and Phoebe is unabashedly not law-abiding. Your characters can be made even more interesting by giving them internal goals that conflict with their external goals. Phoebe wants revenge on the man who killed her sister. That's an external goal. But she also wants a normal life, and increasingly a future with Jake. So that puts what she wants inside, in direct conflict with her need to stop the bad guy. For a more in-depth look at this type of character creation, I would recommend getting Dixon's book. For me, the Smiley book is my character creation Bible. The book used to be hard to find, but has been updated and released and is available at a variety of online bookstores. I go back to his book whenever I'm having trouble figuring out my cast of characters and how they fit together. I tend to be drawn to script and screenwriting books because that is where I began my writing adventures. Let's take a closer look at creating powerful characters. I'm going to give you a name, and I want you to imagine what she might be like. Ready? Pansy. Unless you already knew, this was the original name that Margaret Mitchell gave to the character now internationally known as Scarlett O'Hara. I'm betting you didn't come up with a spoiled Southern belle who looks like Vivien Leigh. If you did know, I'm betting you regularly win at trivia. Though this Rose by Another Name got a more famous moniker, Mitchell did an outstanding job of creating a character that is truly unforgettable. Nothing hurts worse, in my humble opinion, than sweating blood and words on a story, sending it out with hope and fear, and having it come back with a rejection letter that calls your characters wooden or flat, or get a review saying that. Unless the intent was to write a modern Pinocchio story, this probably isn't what you were going for. No one wants to be Geppetto, but where do we find the magic to create characters readers can't forget? If you believe reviews, which I do when they are in my favor, then my characters strike a chord with most readers and reviewers. Hey, we can't win them all. I will confess that creating characters is the part I love most about writing, and I have to wonder if it's because I came to novel writing from a playwriting-screenwriting background. Playwrights and screenwriters must create characters that aren't tightly bound by physical descriptions, since there is no way they can know who will play which role. We must give most of our attention to what's inside, because this is the only part of the character that we can control. In his book, Playwriting, The Structure of Action, Sam Smiley identifies 6 basic character traits, from the simple tangible to the complex intangible, that are important to good character creation. They are biological, physical, dispositional, motivational, deliberative, decisive. By understanding and using these traits, you rise above simple craftsman to character magician, resulting in characters that linger after the last page is turned. Let's take a closer look at these traits. Biological traits are the most basic. Is my character animal, mineral, vegetable, or machine? Male, female, androgynous, other. Once you know this, you can move on to the physical. But don't get too excited. Screenwriters and playwrights tend to focus more on defining characteristics, such as clothing, employment, characteristic movement, quirks, and nervous habits, rather than appearance. The shadow and spirit of the character need to take form, or the character may be confined to an ill-fitting frame that doesn't resonate with readers. I avoid words like beautiful or even assigning hair color until I know my characters better. Anyone who has read my books also knows my characters are rarely well endowed in the bosom department. My imagination is good, but not that good. Jean Marie Ward from Crescent City Blues Reviews commented about my heroine from The Last Enemy. Danny's wry and intelligently daft point of view sucks you in from the very first paragraph. By the time she sees her hip bones for the first time in years and decides they aren't as good as she remembers, you're hooked. It was Danny's very human and all too common weakness that made the connection, that made Ward root for her to succeed against the odds. I spend most of my time with the intangible traits because these are where the spirit of your characters is created. It is within these traits that you discover what they want. We begin with the dispositional, defined as the prevailing mood or life attitude. Is the character an optimist or pessimist, fast or slow, reflective or impulsive? These traits are a foundation for the deeper levels of motivation and deliberation. I took a play directing class some years back. I had to direct a 5-minute play. 2 friends helped me, one blonde, one brunette. When the play was over, the professor told me he couldn't tell them apart. They both had the same disposition, the same prevailing attitude. I learned a huge lesson from that because it can happen in a book too. Look for ways to contrast the dispositions of your main characters, and doing this with your supporting cast can help highlight the main characters. One of the books where I used the contrasting disposition was Relatively Risky, the first book in my Big Uneasy series. Nell, my heroine, is a dreamy children's book author and kid magnet. Alex, my hero, is a tough, no-nonsense cop and the oldest of 13 kids. He's done with kids. It wasn't easy to bring these two together, but it was a lot of fun. When you're starting out, it doesn't hurt to start with a heavy hand and then dial it back to subtlety and revisions, and as you come to know your characters better. Motivation occurs on 3 levels: instinct, subconscious; emotion, semi-conscious; and sentiment, conscious. This is where your characters' wants and needs comes into play. Characters who have layers of motivation have greater depth, believability, and humanity, particularly when their instinct, subconscious, is at odds with their sentiment, conscious. In The Spy Who Kissed Me, Isabel's instinct is to get as far away as possible from the really cute spy who just dove through the sunroof of her sister's car. Only she can't go home without her sister's car, not if she wants to live. To add to her troubles at a semi-conscious level, she's aware of just how cute the really cute spy is. These conflicting emotions help fuel the humor and the suspense of their meeting while showing the reader 2 things that motivate Isabel: her strong ties to her family and her Good Samaritan complex. Smiley teaches us that deliberative traits refer to the quality and quantity of a character's thoughts. Disposition and motivation reflect your character's living, acting, feeling, and desiring. Deliberation is your character thinking. This thinking should occur on 2 levels: expedient and ethical. Ethical thought debates the right and wrong, while expedient deals with reactions to pressures from other characters and circumstances. And this is where you can really connect with your readers by creating an environment where your characters can wrestle with their human condition. What is something your character would never ever do? What situation might force them to do just that? Even if you don't use the answer to that question in your story, it can help you better understand your characters. Throughout The Spy Who Kissed Me, we see Isabel wrestling with what she wants, the really cute spy, and what she fears, the really cute spy, and the people trying to kill them both. But I would have failed to reach Isabel and Danny's humanity if I hadn't pushed through to the last level of characterization: decisive traits. It is action that is most interesting to read. Action, not thinking about action, that provokes conflict. It is action that creates complications, crises, and satisfying climaxes. All my characters had to do something, or I wouldn't be writing this book. A word of caution here. As you are mixing up your characters, be careful of overloading them with a kaleidoscope of traits simply for the sake of complexity. Only use the traits that matter to the story you are trying to tell. As your story unfolds, you will find that some traits will rise to the top, while others will fall away or become redundant. It is important during the rewriting process to test your characters for the proper balance. Is your hero a proper match for your heroine? Is there some parity in what they both want? For instance, you wouldn't want one character to have life or death at stake, while the other is worried about a job. To help, Smiley provides a character soundness checklist that includes these: volition, stature, interrelation, attractiveness, credibility, diction. Volition is simply the willpower or the ability to act. Stature measures the strength and intensity of your character. Male characters are especially hard for me. They make me work hard to figure out who they are and what they want. This made it particularly satisfying when Ward, from the previously mentioned review, had this to say about Matt Kirby, my hero from The Last Enemy. Matt Kirby takes longer to charm. The lonesome lawman treads perilously close to cliché until Jones turns the page and shows his past. But Jones goes beyond that to achieve something far more difficult, showing how closely hero and villain can mirror each other without ever tipping the balance in favor of the bad guy. This tells me that for at least one reader, I succeeded in giving Matt real heroic stature and complexity. Interrelation is about character interaction. How involved are they in the story and each other? Are they on stage enough? Do they interact appropriately with others? Are they too different to be believable? In an early version of my book, a reader called my character a twit. It hurt, but it also showed me that I needed to work on her ability to relate with the other characters and the reader. Attractiveness has more to do with wholeness than beauty. Is your hero too heroic? Temper with flaws. Is your villain too villainous? Balance with a smidgen of virtue. The villain in The Last Enemy is pretty villainous, but he's also lovesick, something we can all identify and sympathize with. Credibility asks this question: is character motivation and outward action consistent? Never sacrifice clarity for complexity. Take time during and after key scenes for your major characters to react and reflect on what happened and how it has changed them. Though you may think diction is not applicable to fiction writing, it is a mistake to not check to see if your characters sound the way they should. No one uses words in exactly the same way, and your character shouldn't either. If a reader can act out your story in their minds, if you give them a well-crafted script and great players, they will stay with your story until the curtain rings down and the credits roll. If you find you are still struggling with character creation, there are other books on characters out there. We all need to find the ones that speak to us and our personal process. If you've got a problem, keep researching until you find your answers. But don't forget to look in places other than how-to books. Like I said before, I found lots of help and inspiration from script and playwriting books, or just reading novels that delight me as a reader. I've also learned about characters from watching television and movies, and from reading other authors' books. Just be sure you learn from others and don't borrow, i.e., plagiarize others. There have been some high-profile scandals involving plagiarizing, though some people have been astonishingly hesitant to call this spade a spade. Personally, I don't understand how anyone can get pleasure from getting published on someone else's talent. I want my book to be my work. And to keep from being accused of plagiarism, keep a few copies of your work in process, with dates recorded. Hey, we all hope to be that famous.